October 3rd, 1849. A freezing, rainy night in Baltimore. A man is found collapsed in the gutter outside a tavern. He's wearing filthy, cheap clothes that aren't his, muttering incoherent names to the sky. 4 days later, he was dead. This was Edgar Allan Poe, the mastermind of dark literature. For 170 years, textbook history told you he died of alcoholism, madness, or rabies. But history lied. Poe didn't drink himself to death. He was kidnapped, drugged, and used as a human voting machine in a deadly political syndicate. This is the horrific true story of the scam that murdered Edgar Allan Poe. September 27th, 1849. Edgar Allan Poe steps onto a train in Richmond, Virginia. He's clean-shaven. He's wearing a tailored suit. He's carrying a gold-headed cane and thousands of dollars in enthusiasm to start his own literary magazine in New York. For the first time in years, Poe's life is heading toward peace. Then, he makes one fatal mistake. He stops in Baltimore for a quick transfer. And then, total silence. For 6 agonizing days, the most famous writer in America vanishes off the face of the earth. No letters, no sightings, no trace. What Poe didn't realize was that he had walked into Baltimore on the worst possible week. It was election season, and in 1849, elections in Baltimore weren't decided by democracy. They were decided by blood. To understand what happened to Poe, you have to understand the nightmare of 19th century American politics. In Baltimore, political gangs like the Whigs and the Democrats operated brutal street syndicates. One notorious group was known as the Blood Tubs, gangsters who literally kept tubs of animal blood at polling places to splash onto voters who dared to vote for the wrong candidate. To win elections, these gangs created a terrifying system called Cooping. Here is how the scam worked. On the days leading up to an election, thugs roamed the streets hunting for victims. They targeted strangers, travelers, immigrants, or lonely men who had no family in town to report them missing. If you were targeted, they grabbed you, dragged you into dark, damp basements, and locked you in a hidden room called the coop. Inside, you were systematically broken. They forced you to drink toxic mixtures of cheap brandy blended with opium and mercury to strip away your free will. Why? Because you were about to become a human voting machine. On election day, the gangs dragged their drugged captives out of the basements. They marched them from one polling station to another across the city. Before every new vote, they forced the victims to swap clothes, putting on hats, coats, or filthy rags, so election judges wouldn't spot the repetition. One man could be forced to vote 15, 20, or 30 times under fake identities. Now, picture Edgar Allan Poe on October 3rd. He arrives at the train station. He's alone. He's a well-dressed outsider with money to a political gang hunting for fresh bodies. Poe was the perfect prey. They dragged the mastermind of Gothic horror into a dark basement. They stripped him of his fine suit, stole his luggage, and threw him into oversized, dirty clothes. For days, they poisoned his mind with toxic alcohol. For days, they dragged his trembling body through election booths. And when the polls finally closed, they had no more use for him. They threw him onto the wet, muddy cobblestones outside Ryan's Tavern, a corrupt Whig polling site, and left him to die in the rain. When a passerby named Joseph Walker found Poe in the mud, the writer was barely recognizable. He was rushed to Washington College Hospital. For 4 horrific days, Poe hovered between life and death in a dim, isolated room. He sweated profusely. He fought off invisible demons on the walls. He was in a state of violent delirium, trembling so hard that nurses had to restrain him. And then came the creepiest detail of all. Throughout his final night, Poe kept screaming one single name over and over into the dark corridor. Reynolds! Reynolds! No one to this day knows who Reynolds was. Was he a member of the gang that kept him in the basement? Was he another victim trapped in the coop with him? Or was he the man who lured Poe into the trap? Poe took that secret to his grave. On the morning of October 7th, he whispered his final words, "Lord, help my poor soul," and closed his eyes forever. So how did the world forget this brutal murder, because immediately after his death, Poe's bitter rival, Rufus Griswold, wrote a venomous fake obituary. He painted Poe as a depraved, hopeless drunk who died from a hopeless binge, destroying Poe's reputation to cover up the dark political reality of Baltimore. The public bought the lie. For 170 years, history blamed Poe for his own death. Edgar Allan Poe spent his entire life writing terrifying stories about men trapped in dark rooms, victims buried alive, and helpless souls hunted by invisible evil. He thought those horrors only existed in his imagination. In the end, he died inside one.